My name is Renata Voss, and I am 61 years old. On the morning they escorted me out of the building I spent 22 years building from a single spreadsheet and a borrowed conference room, I said 2 sentences. One to the woman firing me. One to her father-in-law, the man standing in the hallway pretending he had nothing to do with it. Then I drove to my attorney's office, activated a clause I wrote in 2007 during a 2 a.m. call with a nervous investor from Boston, and waited for the board meeting I had already legally mandated. By 3 p.m., I was sitting at the head of that boardroom. Not because I fought for it, because I owned it. I want to tell you how that happened. But first, I need to take you back to the beginning. Not the dramatic beginning, the real one. A windowless office in 1999, 2 folding chairs, a whiteboard with a broken cap on the blue marker, and a founder who thought compliance was something that happened to other companies. His name was Clement Aldridge. Clem. He had the kind of vision that lights up a room and the kind of financial discipline that burns one down. He could pitch a $40 million deal on a cocktail napkin, then accidentally mail 6 figures to a vendor we had already paid twice. He was magnetic and chaotic in equal measure, and in those early years, I was the person standing behind him with a fire extinguisher and a spreadsheet. I wasn't the flashy one. Never wanted to be. While Clem worked the room at investor dinners, I was reading the fine print on the contracts those investors would sign in the morning. I knew where every dollar went. I knew which board member had a conflict of interest they hadn't disclosed. I knew where the risk lived, because I had mapped it. When Clem offered me a title after our first real funding round, I declined. "You want equity instead," he said, half joking. "I want to own the ceiling," I said, "not rent a chair beneath it." He laughed. Then he agreed. He almost always agreed with me eventually. That's why we worked. And that agreement, casual as it was, would change everything 22 years later in a boardroom neither of us expected to end up in quite like that. Have you ever chosen the long game over the easy win? Tell me about it in the comments. And if you're new here, hit subscribe and leave your city below. I love knowing where you're listening from. Now let me show you what that ceiling looked like by year 8. By year 3, I held 18%. By year 8, 41%. The CFO left the company in a screaming match over misallocated funds. I acquired his shares at a price that reflected his desperation more than the company's value. He needed the money. He signed quickly. I didn't rush him, but I didn't wait either. Then came Clem's brother, Gordon. He tried to sue us into dissolution over an old partnership agreement and failed spectacularly in court. His settlement offer included the shares he had been sitting on. I accepted them in exchange for a watertight NDA and a promise I would never speak publicly about the offshore accounts his side of the family had quietly forgotten to report. 72%. I owned 72% of the company I had helped build from a broken marker and a borrowed room. My name appeared nowhere on the company brochure. No plex. No portrait in the lobby. No profile in the annual report. Just a line in the Delaware registry and a series of very carefully drafted shareholder agreements. I never played poker. I built the table. Then I printed the cards. But owning the table isn't enough if someone can flip it when you're not looking. I learned that lesson before I needed it. And the lesson had a name. Clause 17C. I wrote Clause 17C in 2007. It came after Clem's nephew, a 29-year-old with fresh business cards and borrowed confidence, tried to fire the entire marketing department during a quarterly review. His reason? They had missed a campaign deadline during his sister's wedding week. He rescinded the decision 48 hours later under pressure. But I sat with the fear of it for months. What if someone with access but no accountability made a decision that couldn't be undone? I drafted the clause during a late call with our lead investor, a cautious man from Boston named Philip, who had made his fortune by reading what everyone else skipped. The clause was simple in plain language. If a non-equity executive terminated a corporate officer without a prior board vote, all their executive authority was immediately suspended. The board was required to convene within 3 hours. Voting control reverted to the majority shareholder. Me. Philip signed it. Every investor signed it. Clem signed it without reading it carefully, which was very on brand. I filed it, updated it when necessary. And for 17 years, no one ever needed it. I never told anyone I expected to use it. I just made sure it would work when I did. I activated Clause 17C before I walked into that building. Timestamped at 7:03 a.m. notarized. Couriered to every board member, every investor, and every general counsel attached to the company. The packets went out while the city was still waking up, while the coffee was still brewing in the lobby, while the security guard was doing his first round of the morning. Then I drove to the office. Her name was Sasha Aldridge, née Whitmore. She had arrived that morning in a silk blouse, the color of boardroom ambition, and heels that had never touched a job site. Her MBA was from a school with a glossy campus and a generous legacy admissions policy. Her husband was Clem's son, Davis, a man who had his father's charm and none of my patience. She had not introduced herself to me before calling me into her office. My old office, if we are being specific. She did not look up from the iPad. Renata, we're letting you go. Effective immediately. Security will escort you to the elevator. Behind her stood a junior HR coordinator who looked like he was witnessing something he would describe to a therapist for years. I stood up. Adjusted my jacket. Placed my badge on the desk. I'd like to do this properly, I said. Tell Clem the board meeting in 3 hours should be interesting. Then I walked out. I didn't go home. I went to my attorney's office, a woman named Clara Desai who had been my quiet collaborator on the legal architecture of this company for 15 years. We ordered sandwiches. We waited. We did not celebrate. There was nothing to celebrate yet. What I felt wasn't satisfaction. It was the particular stillness of someone who has been preparing for a storm so long that when it finally arrives, the only thing left to do is stand still and let it break. Across the city, the packets were landing. The board members were canceling golf games by 11 a.m. The Founders' Council read the phrase suspension of executive authority upon unilateral termination by non-equity appointee and said, out loud to an empty office, oh no. Then quieter, oh no. Meanwhile, the IT director had received Sasha's Slack message at 9:22 a.m. deactivate all access for Renata Voss. Full system sweep. He had looked at the internal registry. Primary administrator. Compliance authority. Legal digital signatory. Shareholder ledger control. Equity stake, 72.04%. He had closed his laptop, walked to legal, and said, if I deactivate her, we lose 3 compliance systems, 7 investor portals, and the SEC autofiling API. Legal had not looked up. Don't touch it. I was still wired in. I never stopped being wired in. And somewhere in a corner office that used to smell like my coffee, Sasha was drafting a LinkedIn post about decisive leadership, completely unaware that the building had already begun rejecting her like a foreign body. Clem got the call on the 7th hole of the country club he half-funded. The 3rd call. He ignored the first 2. By the time his general counsel's number came through a 3rd time, persistent and sharp, he had already dropped his club. He didn't tip the caddy. He didn't change his cleats. He drove back in under 20 minutes, which was a personal record for a man who typically required 2 assistants and a parking attendant to navigate a Tuesday morning. Legal was waiting. So was his CFO. So was a conference table full of people who had stopped pretending to be calm. The general counsel didn't waste words. Per Clause 17C of the amended shareholder agreement, any executive termination carried out by a non-equity appointee without prior board vote results in immediate revocation of all interim leadership authority. Suspension of appointments made in the past 48 hours. Automatic reversion of executive control to the majority shareholder, pending emergency board review. Clem looked at the table for a long time. Who signed the termination? Silence. Who signed it? The CFO looked at his hands. The junior assistant looked at her tablet. The general counsel looked at Clem. Your daughter-in-law. Alone. The color left Clem's face the way tide goes out. Slowly, then all at once. She doesn't have sign-off authority. No, the attorney said. She never did. Her authority is entirely derivative, which means her unilateral termination of a corporate officer is invalid. And the clause is live. I'll call her. We can rescind. There is no rescind. The packet was filed before the termination was executed. The emergency meeting begins in 2 hours and 14 minutes. Clem sat down like the chair had risen to meet him. Where is she? Probably reordering the office plans, the CFO said, very quietly. Sasha walked into the boardroom at 2:40 Central. Cream blazer. Portfolio. The particular confidence of someone who has not yet realized they are the last to know. She moved toward the head of the table. Nobody stopped her until she was halfway into the chair. The board chair, a man in his 70s with hands like old timber and eyes that had seen 4 recessions, cleared his throat. "You may observe," he said. "But that seat is reserved." She blinked. Reserved for whom? The room did not answer. The general counsel spoke from the far end of the table. "Per Clause 17C, your appointment as Chief Strategy Officer has been suspended, effective immediately. You hold no equity. Your role was not voted on by the board. The termination you initiated this morning was unauthorized. All executive authority granted to you has been revoked." "That clause," she said. "Wasn't it just a formality? Nobody's ever used it. It's in full effect. Activated with proper documentation before your action was initiated." She looked at her husband Davis, seated near the window. He did not meet her eyes. He appeared to be attempting to merge with the wall behind him. "Who triggered it?" she asked. The room stayed quiet. Finally, the board chair leaned back. "She did," he said simply. "The one you tried to remove." The name wasn't spoken. It didn't need to be, because I was already in the room in every way that mattered. In the documents they were holding. In the clause they were enforcing. In the system that had quietly rejected every attempt to erase me that morning. She hadn't just lost the seat. She had never had it. She just hadn't known that until now. I arrived at 3 p.m. on the dot. Same black suit I'd worn to every board meeting for 20 years. Tailored. Not flashy. Mine. I walked to the head of the table and placed my folder in front of me. I did not sit. As majority shareholder, I formally request a binding vote to rescind all executive appointments made in the past 48 hours, pending shareholder review. The board chair logged the motion without expression. Received. Entered into record. Immediate consideration. I looked at Clem then. He was staring at the table. He had the look of a man who had just discovered the thing he thought he built had been quietly held together, this whole time, by someone he had never properly thanked. He had handed his daughter-in-law power like it came with the family Wi-Fi password. He had not read the clause. He had not asked me what would happen if someone like her arrived. He had not needed to. I had written the answer in 2007, and it was reading itself aloud right now. The board cleared. The motion passed. Sasha's appointment was suspended. Every executive decision she had made in her 11 hours of authority was flagged for review. Davis walked her out. He held her arm like he was steadying something breakable. She did not look back at the table. I remained standing at the head of the room until only Clem and I were left. He spoke first, the way people do when they have run out of strategy and have nothing left but truth. "You set this up. I protected what you handed to people who hadn't earned it." He rubbed his face. He was 68. He looked it that afternoon, in a way he rarely did. "I never meant for it to come to this." "Then you should have read what you signed." A long pause. The HVAC hummed. Somewhere down the hall, a printer beeped. I slid 2 sheets of paper across the table. Left page, a buyout proposal. His family's stake acquired at fair market value. Clean. No litigación. No residual clauses left in the structure like tripwires. Right page, a reorganization plan. I stay. Executive chairwoman. Full structural audit. No ceremonial titles. No more legacies handed out like heirlooms. He looked at both for a long time. "How long do I have?" "You'll have the formal offer tonight. 24 hours to decide." I closed my folder and walked toward the door. "Renata." I stopped but didn't turn. "Did you always know it would end like this?" I thought about 2007. About Philip from Boston. About the broken blue marker and the folding chairs and 22 years of building something I loved inside a structure designed to outlast everyone who tried to take it apart. "I knew it could," I said. "That's why I prepared for it." I opened the door and walked out into the hallway. The same hallway they had walked me through that morning. The same tiles. The same elevator bank. The same framed photo of the founding team in the lobby, which did not include me, and which never had. I passed it without slowing down. The receptionist looked up from the front desk. She had worked there for 11 years. She had seen me arrive every single morning for most of it. "Ms. Boss," she said. I stopped. Smile. Not triumphant. Just real. "Tell IT I'll need my system access restored. Full administrative privileges." I paused. "And a new badge." I was never particularly attached to the old one. Then I walked out into the afternoon. Not because I had returned. Because I had never truly left. Power is not a title. It's not a corner office or a company car or a name on a door. It's knowing the wiring inside the walls. It's the clause everyone forgot you wrote. It's 22 years of choosing equity over applause, structure over credit, patience over pride. They thought they were firing me. What they actually did was activate the last safeguard I built into a company I never stopped owning. I have one question for you before you go. If you spent years building something, a business, a family, a life, what one thing would you protect above everything else? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. If you haven't subscribed yet, I'd love to have you here for the next one.